Hey, in the news, I understand that the governor of Florida has recently tried to pass a law allowing anyone to carry a firearm without a permit. Over at Walt Disney World's Hall of Presidents, this has the animatronic Lincoln and Kennedy very nervous. Hello. Ouch. 5, 4, 3. CGP Video Pictures presents Trek Tonight, Season 2. This week, Star Trek Film Series, Volume 6. With your hosts, Christopher Pitcher and Leo Byrne-Janicek. Featuring Mike Robin. Tonight's review, The Undiscovered Country. Now live from New York City, Wilmington, Delaware, and Redmond, Washington, it's Trek Tonight. Hey there, Trekkers, and welcome to Trek Tonight, our continuing film series while we wait for Strange New Worlds. We're really thrilled. I'm thrilled. I'm sure Leo is too, because
I can tell.
One of our oldest friends from high school is here tonight, Mike Robin. I don't think I've talked to Mike face to face in like 20 years.
Yep.
He lives on the West Coast and I live on the East Coast. But hey, Mike, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Chris.
Good. You're very welcome.
We have to do better than just meeting at funerals.
Yes, we do.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. You know, Mike, I think you and I used to use a tape recorder and make up talk shows when we were kids.
We did. And I still have one where you fell asleep and you were talking in your sleep. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. That's terrific.
I remember a whole weekend of like semi-supernatural activities that occurred, and we got some of it on tape.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, we used to love to do that.
Yeah.
Hey, Keith Jacobson is here. He says, hi, everyone.
Hey, Keith.
And Angela says, hey, guys. Hey,
Angela.
So, yeah, we are here tonight to talk about Undiscovered Country. And quite frankly, after last week's Final Frontier, this was kind of a little bit of a breath of fresh air, wouldn't you say?
Yes, I would say it's a palate cleanser. I don't want to go back. I think we said what we needed to say about Final Frontier. This is, I wouldn't say this is my favorite. I still think Wrath of Khan is definitely my favorite of the TOS movies.
Right.
But this is a really good one. Much like a lot of science fiction, it's a reflection of the time it was made.
Yes.
And this was post the wall coming down in Germany, the reunification of Germany,
right?
You know, Glasnost and the whole sort of end of the Soviet Union, as reflected through Star Trek. And the Klingons and the Romulans sort of interchangeably were like Eastern Bloc powers.
Yes.
I guess that was Nimoy's idea. I guess originally it was supposed to be an Academy film. That was the original pitch as a prequel, and they didn't do that for some reason. And then Walter Koenig came up with an idea having to do with some kind of worms and something, and basically everybody died at the end, and they didn't go for that one either. And then Nimoy and Nick Meyer came up with this one.
Yeah, it was good.
It was.
It's very good. Scott Taylor is here, gave us a thumbs up. Hey,
I'll
Scott.
be right back. Hold on.
Good to see you there. Hey, Mike, first impressions. What did you think of the film, just generally?
I hadn't seen it in a little while, and I was kind of pleasantly surprised. I remember it kind of plodding along more in my mind, but I thought when I saw it this time, I thought the pacing was really good. There were no parts of the thing where I was like, okay, this is really slogging along here, or this was really bad, or whatever. And I thought just consistently pretty good. It had your standard, 3-part structure, the intro, and then during the they're on the asteroid and they come out. It's like Star Wars, whatever. And you have the great send off at the end.
Right.
Of course, this is the last film where the entire cast, the original series cast is kind of together as one unit like that.
Right.
Yeah, so I thought it was really good. I would put it up there in the top 3 probably, but
Well, it definitely falls into that mythos that the even number films are better than the odd number films.
yeah.
But
And I agree. I agree. I think almost universally people are going to love Wrath of Khan, right? I mean,
yeah.
Christopher Plummer just definitely has gravitas, but come on, Ricardo Montalban. I mean,
yeah.
in a cutoff shirt.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, that is a great film, and of course I always enjoy Christopher Lloyd as a Klingon too. He makes a great Klingon villain. But Leo, yours first impressions on this thing.
I think it still holds up for the most part. There are a few things that sort of feel slightly tone deaf nowadays, but for the most part, I would say it still holds up. It's interesting because, and I was listening to commentary. I think it was like Nicholas Myers and one of the writers.
Right.
And the line only Nixon can go to China.
Yeah, I love that
Vulcan
one.
proverb.
A Vulcan proverb, yeah.
But it's interesting because I wonder how many younger viewers get that reference. The idea that, because Nixon was very, hawkish. He was, anti-communist. He staunch, sort of. He was a Republican, but like an advocate of democracy.
Yes, right.
And the fact that if a Democrat had gone to China, everybody think, oh, they're kowtowing and probably.
You can't say kowtowing, Leo.
No, I know, but that's what they would say because they're racists.
Yeah.
And what I'd say is what they would say. See. Anyway, so. The idea that because he was so hawkish, that it was felt that like he wouldn't be taken advantage of, he wouldn't be, the wool would have been pulled over his eyes. Right. And Kirk being, a fairly strong, foe to the Klingon Empire, especially, given the death of his son, which will play into the story, it was appropriate. Now, it's interesting, that whole scene. Yes, nice save, Leo. Thank you.
Angela says, "Nice save, Leo." Yeah.
Yes. It was interesting, that whole scene where they're in the conference room. First of all, that was shot in a church nearby Paramount Studios, and they hung out like black curtains and so on.
Wow.
And originally, the script had a bit of business where Kirk's like retired, and they're like, "We want you to do this." And he says, "Well, I'll only do it if I can have my old crew." And they had to go to everybody, and recruit them. And the two things they mentioned were apparently, there we are in the.
Yeah, here's a shot of them sitting around the conference table.
Is Uhura has like a talk radio show, apparently. That was what was written. And Sulu apparently was like driving a cab on some planet and like being frustrated. I'm not sure, like, although, a chat radio show is a step above them being a cabbie. No offense to cabbies, that's hard work.
Yeah.
All respect, but it's like if you were like, I was the helmsman of the starship, the flagship of the Federation, and then you're like, where you going, Mac? It's like, and I'm not sure what they had for the other characters, but
I won't go until you say make it so.
Yeah. They would only have to, since they would have to build 6 new sets for these fairly short bits.
Right.
It was decided that they would all just be there, and I think it works better.
They were under severe budgetary constraints, and apparently a lot of the old sets that they were going to use were destroyed in a parking lot coming out of storage by a storm, and it almost got canceled because they didn't want to pay for new sets. But then they reused a lot of the some stuff from Khan and other ones, and they, as you said, filmed in churches, and they also were using the Next Generation sets as well, and reusing those.
It was the engine room because it had that plexiglass sort of walkway.
Right.
So they were definitely, Star Trek is known for its thriftiness for the most part, especially the early shows, because they didn't have a lot of money, and every year they kept getting less and less money, so they had to do like dumpster dives to find like
making medical tricorders out of salt shakers and whatever.
Yeah,
that's when they had money. but I think it still holds up, and it is interesting how, for a long time after sort of the fall of the wall, in the end of the Soviet Union, the Russians were no longer sort of the boogeymen they had been for like most of our lives growing up.
Right.
But now, of course, the Russians have returned to their status as as the sort of Eastern threat. So interesting how things come around.
That's true. So I guess that's why, from what you're saying, Mike, I guess that's why the bridge of the Excelsior is basically a refit of the bridge of the Enterprise. Because this does not look like the Excelsior from Search for Spock.
No. And the lighting too, how dark that is, because they were talking about that to save money. Well, supposedly to add atmosphere, right? Because they were talking about, Citizen Kane and this and that, but by only lighting certain parts of the set, they made it dark, so they didn't even have to decorate the edges of the set. So if you actually look at some of the scenes, there's like just like a tarp thrown on the side or whatever, and it's just not lit, and they just weren't dealing with it.
Yeah. Does anybody else? I mean, I don't want to sort of jump to this, but I mean, the first thing you see really is Captain Sulu on the Excelsior.
Yes.
So, does anybody have an idea as to why this is the only starship that has a tea table?
Or
captain's prerogative, I guess.
I guess. I mean,
I think it's half a Dalek.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it's a great shot when the teacup falls. I love that shot. But in watching it again, I thought to myself, why is that even there?
Well, I mean, if you remember from the original series during the M5 episode, there was it was the Commodore who was aboard. It was either I don't know if it was the Excelsior or the Lexington or one of the other ships, and he had his captain's chair, but the back of his chair was higher.
Right.
It was like a little more like, it almost looked like more like a Barca lounger than
well,
it
was like the Mirror Universe chair.
Yeah, it was a little taller.
Yeah.
And I imagine if you're the captain, you get to customize sort of your captain stuff.
Maybe.
By the way, the company that made the China, the Excelsior China, and also the China they had at the big state dinner later on, was made by the same company who does China for the White House.
Yeah, it was Fisselgraph.
Yeah, it looks like all the antique rail China.
Yeah. And I remember running around to Fisselgraph outlets trying to score pieces of that stuff, and I only have a couple.
Yeah, I remember that last time I visited you, which was a while ago, that you had some of that.
Yeah, I have a little bit. of it. But that was on the tail end of the fact that I had bought up all this Titanic China. So, of course, I had to have Star Trek China because
that would be top of my list.
Titanic aficionado, but Star Trek, obviously, I loved a lot longer. So
I guess they gave up the Titanic name and decided that was a bad idea for the Star Trek universe.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, you only see that on Doctor Who. But at any rate, so yeah, I loved seeing Sulu in command of the Excelsior.
Yes.
I thought that was fantastic. It was clear that some of this was a lead into the concept of a Captain Sulu series, which we never got. But I would have watched the shit out of it if it had been.
Oh yeah. But by the way,
Universal.
Yeah.
One of the reasons they had Sulu on another ship, is they realized in writing the script that they needed another ship for the big fight at the end of the movie. So that's why they put him on another ship.
Right. Keith Jacobson says that the reason he has that tea table is because Sulu likes tea. Just became one of my favorite captains. If you are a regular viewer, you know that Keith is a big tea aficionado. Let's see. So
I have a nice pu'er here right in my Star Trek.
Oh, look at you. There you go. Yeah, unfortunately, all of my Star Trek mugs are in the dishwasher, so I had to have my Darth Vader mug tonight.
Nice.
Yeah. Hey, while Leo had to step away, do you want to show us some of those things you've got behind you, Mike? Is there something you want to show off?
yeah, I don't know. I guess I can. I have the sign.
You've got some
Have the-
interesting artifacts back there.
Yeah, I got the old signed cast photo here.
Right? That's
I have
cool.
original sketch of the 1701 from Matt Jeffries.
I think that's fantastic. Look at
Yeah.
that. That is awesome.
Yeah, that was on display at the Sci-Fi Museum in Seattle for a while, but I got it back, and then I have some other random stuff because I had worked with some of the Star Trek cast at a previous company about 20 years ago.
Yeah. What were you doing with those guys? Just out of curiosity. Can you talk about it?
It was a company in Redmond. We were doing like voice recognition stuff, like kind of way before its time. And it's like, it was this conversational thing, right? So the CEO of the company wanted to be very Star Trek-y and was a Star Trek fan. So yeah, he just wanted to go off the whole Star Trek computer thing and make that the company's kind of way to go forward. But unfortunately, the company didn't really go anywhere, but it was a lot of fun at the time, the internet bubble time.
Right, exactly. All right, so let's see. Where do you want to go next, Leo?
Well, it's because we have Gorkin played by David Warner, who gets a much better. He's not in, well. Actually, I think he has more screen time in this than he did in Final Frontier.
Right.
And he's given a lot more to work with. The architect of the peace between Klingons and the Federation.
And I guess we should mention very briefly that the reason that this comes about is because the moon of Praxis, which is a mining planet, explodes, and somehow or other that whatever they're mining there is what stabilizes the atmosphere.
Well, I think the explosion just was such a titanic sort of ecological disaster that said that it would be Kronos would become uninhabitable within 50 years.
Yeah, they mentioned the whole ozone layer thing, which was one of the old cries about environmentalism at the time.
Right.
You don't hear much about the ozone anymore, but just everything else.
You do actually, but
you hear about
warming
global
and all
warming.
that.
You hear about global warming, but
yeah.
I think what Mike means is you don't hear much about the cause, which is the whole thing about ozone depletion. I think that's what it means. But so that's what brings the Klingons to the table, because they really can't afford to continue to wage war and have this hostile posture. And then of course there are people in the Federation that aren't happy with that. And I think one of my favorite lines when the Chancellor is talking, and I'm going to skip ahead a tiny bit, but I love the line. And when you talk about the Cold War, it fits so well. And when he says to Kirk, people of our generation are going to have the hardest time living in this brave new world.
Yes.
And it's true, because they're all used to hating each other.
Which again, Star Trek is sort of at its best when it's reflecting sort of social issues and these questions that don't necessarily have a clean answer, because as it goes on, it turns out parties on both sides are like, we'd prefer to still be at war.
Yeah, I thought Kirk's arc on that whole thing in this movie was actually very well done and very believable. How he had the hatred in the beginning and how he slowly changed and how he had kind of the trust at the end. And I thought he did a pretty good job with that. Right. Originally, apparently, Kirk wanted that line softened when he said, let them die. He wanted to kind of say that and then gesture or make a facial expression to Spock that's, I didn't mean that. But they actually cut that out, and I think it's better that they cut that out.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea that he still held all this anger and resentment about the death of his son. So
right.
And also is if you observe the Gorkon kind of has a Lincoln beard, if you know, like he's got he's got that chin strap.
They mentioned that Lincoln was actually, they talked about Lincoln and Sadat and Gorbachev and the Dalai Lama as all these inspirations for him.
Yeah. Although I love his giant dinosaur bone walking stick.
I don't have a shot of that, but yes, it's very cool.
I
love all the boots with the little horns on the
little horns at the end.
Yeah. So do we want to talk about the dinner at all?
It's an interesting scene because Kirk is obviously like can barely stand to sit at the same table. Also,
Right.
you notice both the drinks and the food was mostly blue. I mean, they were all drinking Romulan ale,
Yeah.
Right.
but there's also like when you look at the scene, a lot of the food on the plate is blue because
Yeah.
it's the future and they have blue food then.
Right.
Well, there's a story. So none of the actors would eat that during the filming, and they gave a $20 bounty for every bite that they took of that. and apparently Kirk took it to heart, and he ate like the entire blue squid. It was an actual blue dyed squid, and he ate the whole thing by the end of it.
Well,
That
you
sounds
do have the one general who's like shoveling it into his face
Yeah.
when Uhura's asking him about whether he likes Shakespeare or not.
It's interesting because both sides, there's Spock and Gorkon are the ones who are like, okay, let's all be nice, although Uhura's trying to be cool and so is McCoy.
Yep.
But
Yep.
both
And
Kirk-
even Scotty's trying to jump in.
Yeah, they're all trying to be, Kirk is just stewing at the end of the table,
Yeah.
and he's sitting next to General Chang, played by the great Christopher Plummer. Yeah. With his eye patch bolted into his head.
Yeah.
Crazy
it's great.
badass. Yeah, look
It's
at that.
quite a look. It really is.
Yeah, he was worried about all the makeup. He originally didn't want to take the part because of all the heavy Klingon makeup. So
Right.
he got a pass, and they said, "Okay, for you, we'll tone it down a little bit." And I don't know why he is the only obviously Chinese name. How come every other Klingon has like a Klingon name, but this guy has a Chinese name, and he kind
I
of
don't
looks
know.
that way too.
I mean, he does have a little bit of a
Fu Manchu kind of.
an Emperor Chang, Emperor. What's his name from Flash Gordon?
Ming the
Ming.
Merciless.
He does have a bit of a Ming the Merciless look about
Yeah,
him.
well, there's, there was a lot of sort of Red Peril mixed in with the Klingons,
Yeah.
who kind of had a Mongolian vibe to them back in the day.
Yeah.
And it's if you just look at the makeup, it is similar to the makeup we now generally consider like standard Klingon makeup.
Right.
But this stuff, it's like a little more subtle. It's a little less.
I mean, if you
Richie.
look at the guy, okay, so in this picture, you can see.
Yeah, the guy in the background is completely.
I mean, he looks very much like what we expect Klingons to look like.
Yeah.
But you are right that
It's toned down.
it is toned down. Yeah, very much so.
Or they toned it up later on.
Either one, yeah. Although when you look at Klingons from Star Trek: The Motion Picture, they're pretty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there was the whole dinner scene is very sort of this fraught thing, and everybody's trying to be polite, and it's interesting because Chang basically gets the better of Kirk because he's like very there's a lot of like shade thrown by the Klingons at the Federation, which is a really sort of weird diplomatic move to make when you're trying to forge a peace.
Yeah.
And the whole thing, like, human rights. We all know the Federation is a Homo sapiens only club, and there's that, and of course, Gorkon is like, present company accepted. And they're like, all right, let's try to move past that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
one of my favorite bits is when they start, throwing things back and forth.
Yes.
And Chang ends up saying something about we need breathing room.
Yeah.
Kirk says Hitler, 1936.
Yeah.
And the look on Spock's face.
Yeah.
Where the eyebrow goes up and he looks over at Kirk like, oh, you didn't go there.
We're like, what the fuck is up with you?
Yeah.
It's
a great look. Nimoy did it.
It is a great look. And of course, later on we find out it's like Romulan ale is not to be served at any state functions going forward. It perhaps loosened some tongues, and it seemed like a lot of them had hangovers as a result.
Oh yeah.
But I wish there was more of Chang and Kirk, because you could obviously tell their chemistry because they worked together like in the 50s when Shatner was Plummer's understudy for like Henry VIII when he was sick, and he played Christopher Plummer's role a couple times in that. And they'd known each other like forever, and you could kind of tell when they were kind of like really close.
They did have a very good chemistry, and they're both classically trained actors.
Right.
People forget that Shatner is a classically trained actor.
Yeah.
He basically has done everything, that guy.
Yeah. So
I respect him for never turning down any work, no matter how good or how silly it is. Yeah,
he he likes to work, which is some actors like, well, I don't know if I want to do that. And, like Shatner's like, where do I sign?
Yeah.
How much?
Yeah.
And you got to keep working, and then you keep people remember you. So
right.
Priceline.com.
Yeah, a lot of those.
So everybody's done. They beam them back, and they're all relieved. The dinner's over. Bones is going off to get a pot of coffee, and Kirk's going to go sleep it off. And then all of a sudden, they get this issue with what kind of radiation was it? I've forgotten now.
Neutron, I think.
Yeah, there's some sort of radiation thing, and Spock calls Kirk back up to the bridge, and he's really tired. But he perks up when he hears about this, and they're on the bridge, and then all of a sudden, it looks like their ship has fired on the.
It's the Kronos One, which I guess is the Air Force One of the Klingon homeworld.
Yes. Now it's interesting because, as you always say, Leo, spoilers for a 25 or 30-year-old movie. But when I first saw this movie, I didn't catch some of the stuff that's in there with Valeris. Because knowing what she ends up being a part of, when you go back and watch it, knowing that, you can see her doing all kinds of stuff. You know that she's trying to talk to Spock about it.
Yeah.
You know that those two guys that are talking shade about the Klingons when they first come on, and she says, "You two have work to do, don't you?" Well, aren't those the guys that end up assassinating?
Yeah, they're the ones who they are the assassins.
Right. So she's saying to them, go get ready to do that.
Yeah.
It's also that scene with her and Spock, I believe it was Nicholas Myers was talking about in the commentary. It's like she's kind of having a nervous breakdown, for a Vulcan. And neither one of them is really listening to each other.
Right.
Like, Spock is saying, I found that the future unfolds as it should. And she's like, but this is a crucial turning point, and I'm not, she's like obviously having a moment of doubt, a crisis of faith.
Right.
But because he doesn't pick up on it really, and just sort of like tries to assuage her, and it is true, just like certain things, like she walks in Kirk when he's doing his as they say, she gave them the personal logs with like, I'll never trust the Klingons. I blame them for the death of my son, and they get to trot that out at that show trial.
Yeah.
So,
but it's interesting. And just to throw back to this, because I know we talked briefly about this a little bit a couple of episodes ago, but the idea that they originally wanted Kirstie Alley to come back and reprise her role as Saavik.
Yeah.
And then they couldn't get her, so they created Valeris. But I don't think I could have seen Saavik doing all that.
I'm not sure I could either. I think a new character works better.
Me too.
And it's interesting because that's Kim Cattrall, who is perhaps best known for her work on Sex and the City.
Yes.
Although she's certainly done many other things.
Right.
But she really sort of like disappears into the role in the best possible way. Like you don't look at that and think, oh, there's Samantha.
Right.
Yeah. She's does an excellent job. So
yeah. Cool. All right.
I mean, we don't really have to go beat by beat, but we
don't. We really don't.
There's the assassination of Gorkon.
Yeah.
Well, we got to cover that, right? Because to me, when I think of this movie, that's what I remember is the zero-G stuff, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I always think of is the blood and the floating around and all that stuff.
The Pepto-Bismol blood.
Yeah, the purple blood.
And that was one of the earliest uses of CG. Not the first, but one of the earliest.
Right.
And without CG, they wouldn't have been able to get that effect of the floating globules of blood.
Yeah, and apparently it was Pepto-Bismol colored, not by mistake, but because of ratings. They said if that blood was red, it would be too violent. So they actually had to change the color. Interesting. Which was surprising for, I thought, PG at the time, but maybe things have changed a lot more than I remember.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah. So
they get sent to Rurapent. They have a show trial where they're defended by Worf's grandfather, Colonel Worf.
Okay, so that's one of the things I wanted to talk about. So, because it was interesting, when you watch watch it with the closed captioning on it, it says Worf. It doesn't say which Worf. It just says Worf.
I guess Worf was named for his grandfather.
I guess.
So
I'm trying to
played
see.
by Michael Dorn, which is kind of a neat.
We kind of skipped over McCoy trying to save him.
Oh yeah, McCoy tries to save him.
Yeah, and that's one thing that kind of bothered me is like, okay, are you saying that all your interactions with the Klingons, you have no idea what their biology is like, and they kind of look so human, but yet he's climbing on top of them, and they're like doing all this stuff. It just seemed kind of strange.
Well, they said, "Well, do you have a surgeon?" Is where we were. Yeah. Presumably, the surgeon was killed, during the attack.
Right.
But I mean, again, this is a very Star Trek thing. Like McCoy, occasionally see Dr. Mbenga in the original series, but we never see, and we occasionally see some. We see Nurse Chapel and maybe some other, background people, extras. But there has to be more than one doctor on a ship of that size.
Right.
There is the chief medical officer, and they have, probably, at least a couple of people can do surgery. Especially if you're a Klingon.
Well, yeah, because Katenga is not a small ship. It's not like a bird of prey.
No, that's a full battleship right there. Right. And the idea that they wouldn't call their. I mean, listen, we could pick these nits, but it's about the characters. So I'm willing to hand wave it. But yeah, there they are. I love their big clunky translator devices.
Yeah,
which kind of have that kind of Soviet era technology, which was like big and bulky. And
I know the compad in the beginning of the movie on the bridge was like this huge clunky. I mean, if they saw an iPad, they would just never even believe that it was possible.
Yeah.
But they're sent to Rurapente. And I did like the judge's gavel, which was like a metal ball with a claw on it. He's like, ding, ding,
and it would make sparks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're sent to the mining penal colony of Rurapente.
Right.
Which is like an ice planet, where they meet and help to escape by Iman, Mrs. David Bowie.
Right.
And she was, I had a note here.
There she is.
Character is Martia, and she was a cameloid, a shape-shifting species we saw there and never again. They've never come back because it's expensive, I imagine.
They actually said that Rurapente was an asteroid, but you're right, Leo. That kind of bug, because it had to be a planet because they were walking around in normal gravity and it had weather and it was obviously a planet, but they called it an asteroid. So.
They call it an asteroid. Sometimes Star Trek will play fairly fast and loose with the science. I mean, admittedly, most of the science of Star Trek is pretty dodgy,
but they can try to be consistent. And I'm only going to bring this up because now you have officially opened up the door. I want to make Craig Lubin happy. One of the first lines in this entire movie was Captain Sulu saying, "We're in the beta quadrant and we're on full impulse heading home." And just a rough back of the envelope, I think that would take like 250 million years to get back on full impulse. Anyway, so I just thought I'd bring that up.
Yeah, I mean, they do. It does feel sometimes they need somebody to be like, okay, we're heading back, best possible speed. That way, you don't have to, worry about the particulars. Because occasionally they say stuff. I'm like, that's not quite the right term, but
full impulse is supposed to be like 1/4 light speed. So that's
Also, the Enterprise leaves space dock at 1/4 impulse speed, which is 1/4 of the speed of light, which means it would
16th
leave a wake of destruction. But again,
I know that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when there was a point, and I don't know where I got this from, but you might remember it too, guys. The idea that you couldn't go to warp within a solar system.
Well, within orbit is my recollection. It would tear the atmosphere away from a planet.
Right.
That you would have to come out of warp in the system and then, go full impulse.
Yeah.
Closer to the planet. So
yeah. Hey guys, we gotta step away for a moment to go to a commercial break, but
okay.
We will be right back after these words.
Dad knows all about space vehicles. He directed me to the new Oldsmobile Silhouette. Its looks are stellar, and the interior is perfect for the enterprising family. The modular seats pull out easily. There's a place for everything. Compared to other forms of space travel, Silhouette is the logical choice. Right, Dad?
Eminently logical.
This is the new
Silhouette. Travel in space and style.
generation of
Excuse me, I'm interested in the new collector's ornament from Hallmark.
Ah, the shuttlecraft Galileo from the Starship Enterprise.
Precisely.
You know, it lights up when you plug it in. And listen.
Shuttlecraft to Enterprise. Spock here. Happy holidays. Live long and prosper. Fascinating.
For a store in your sector now carrying the Star Trek ornament, call 1-800-HALLMARK.
Live long and prosper, right?
No, I'll take 5. Space? We've been there. Time. That's the new frontier. Physically traveling through time isn't possible. Not yet, at least. But with a time machine from Time Computers, you can go into the future. Imagine a whole book, encyclopedia, or even a movie on a single disc.
Whoa.
And the internet is changing the way the next generation think. In the future, it'll change the way we live. From looking at tomorrow's weather to banking, shopping, entertainment, and even communication. From here, we can see 1 billion years into the past. With a time machine, you can see into the future. Why buy an ordinary PC when you can buy a time machine from Time Computers?
Wow.
As
All
sort
right, Mike.
of hokey as that last one was, it's entirely correct.
Yeah.
Except
Yeah.
I have absolutely no recollection of there ever being a time computer. So
I was going to ask you that because you are a
Yeah.
big computer guy, and I was going to ask you that. It's one of the reasons I ran those commercials this time.
there were
But-
so many PC knockoffs at the time, but it's amazing that that company basically must have spent their entire bankroll on that commercial.
Now, it's also possible it was a British company. I don't know where I get that idea from, but
Maybe.
Yeah, they did a number of commercials across the pond.
yeah,
The
a
Star
lot.
Trek crew, so.
Yeah, the cast of the original cast of Star Trek was used a lot in British advertising. So I think probably more so even than here.
Maybe, yeah.
But yeah. Anywho, so where were we?
They were escaping Rurapente.
Escaping Rurapente. Now, did you guys notice the little fuzzy thing that Spock slaps on his back the minute that Kirk?
I was going to mention that because when I saw that this time, I thought at first it looks like just like when he's going to give him a Vulcan neck pinch, and I'm like,
Right.
and then he says, I guess you're right, Jim, and I guess he put that Viridian patch on then.
Yeah.
I thought it's weird that Kirk even knew about it because obviously when he was on Rurapente, he knew about it, but it did look like at the time he acknowledged that had happened. So
I don't think he knew at the time, although watching it now, and I never noticed it before, there's like a little rectangular shaped something that he's, sticker or whatever they used for
Yeah, he
it.
slaps on his shoulder. Yeah.
Yeah. Which the Klingons clearly did not notice.
Right.
Yeah, I love how his full dress uniform is underneath all those big Rurapentian robes.
Yeah. I guess the Klingons, they got a tight budget. There's like, well, here's some furs from guys who died.
Yeah.
You just keep your clothes. We're not going to spend money.
There's so many bits and bobs on that uniform. I don't not surprised the Klingons didn't notice it.
No.
Yeah.
But we got to see some some crazy aliens.
Yeah.
And the blue alien that Kirk fights and punches him.
We didn't talk about it, but I love the little bit when they're trying to. Well, we haven't quite gotten to the rescue yet, but okay, go ahead.
Get nuts.
I don't want. I'm talking about when they are talking Klingon to the listening post, and they're looking everything up in the books and trying to figure out. And
yes,
they just have this like obviously horrible translation, but the two drunk Klingons just don't give a shit, and they're like, "Yeah, whatever.
They figure anybody who's going to Rural Prente has got like a shit job anyways.
Right.
But it's funny that we can't use the translator because they'll know. But it feels like they could have used the translator so they could understand the Klingons.
Right, and they just repeated it or whatever.
Yeah.
Right.
But you know, it was
made for a humorous bit, which was
it was a humorous bit, but also the fact that you couldn't just ask the computer to translate it and print it out and I like phonetically. But it is funnier if they're all like leafing through books. And there's a woman who takes over Valeris' spot later on as the helmsman, who's like when they're all laughing, she's just going like you know, come on, laugh it up.
Yeah. Yeah, that
and her, when they ha and they kind of her is just like it was which was sort of a funny bit because you know the laughing was so fake, you know, but
well, I know Hora does. I mean, Nichelle Nichols does a great job with that goofy laugh too.
Yeah.
But
that is a nice bit, and it's always interesting when you know the idea that they would have to look things up in physical books is a very much like a late 80s, you know, kind of idea.
Yes.
We've occasionally seen books in Star Trek, but mostly everything is on the computer.
Yeah.
You know, the idea of a book is sort of like a charming antique. You know.
It goes back to Kirk's trial.
Yeah.
With the his court-appointed attorney who won't use a computer.
Yeah. I trust this, and his whole apartment is just filled with piles of law books.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, no, that was a good bit. It was it is interesting to watch them try to figure this out. You know, because they were like, you know, we get to see a phaser disintegrate a pot holding a whole bunch of mashed potatoes, but not the mashed potatoes, which is kind of a funny little bit. Also, what was weird, this seems a little weird, because the kitchen or the galley, I should say. Yeah. You've got like this sort of island stove and there's a turkey there and the big pot of mashed potatoes and there's a little cabinet that Valeris flips open and there's 4 phaser pistols. I'm like why do they have like a little armory locker in the galley? Yeah. And also there's a big bank of machines that Spock walks in front of that look like servers of some, I mean, I'm just guessing. They look like some.
And of course, there's a convenient button there to push the phaser alarm button off.
Yeah.
In case someone does that.
But there was just so many buttons and switches and lights, and I'm like, it's a galley. That's not an oven. You know,
but why is there a galley at all?
Well, it's interesting. If you remember the old show, they would put one of those little tape things into a thing, and you get your chicken sandwich and coffee.
Right.
It was actually like the automat, right? There was a guy back there that had to put it in there.
Yeah, I get the impression that I don't know if they were, because they didn't have replicators back then.
But even in the 23rd century, they didn't.
I guess not.
I guess not.
Because we never saw you know.
Well, the episode where they go back and they bring the Air Force pilot back, right? And he orders chicken. He goes through the thing and says, "Oh, I want chicken soup." And they put the chicken soup thing in there, and you hear the little transporter sound, and he takes out the
transporter sound, or is just some sort of electronic nonsense, some audio nonsense? I don't remember it being like, you know.
Yeah.
It wasn't.
So I do know that in the original series, it was not a replicator. I do know.
No, it wasn't. Yeah. And, you know, although somebody might, in the commentary, they were talking about that. And to replicate something, they have to have something to, like a basis for it. So if you want to make mashed potatoes for the crew, you make a big pot of mashed potatoes, taste it, make sure it's good. Then you record it. And that way you always get good mashed potatoes.
But you need to make that much for the...
Well, listen, you got.
I guess you're right. I guess I was looking at it as more modern than it is, because that was one of the things I thought of when I watched it. I was like, why is there?
But just like you were talking about the books being quaint, my feeling, this is a personal galley for the officers, right? It's not to feed anybody, so they get real food, and everybody else gets replicated food.
Maybe the lower decks sort of thing, where it's like, and there were like 3 in a row, like those like tri bunk beds.
Right.
And like there was a point where the Enterprise gets hit by fire, enemy fire, and people like falling out of beds, and it's just like, you know, hammocks would probably be better because if, you know, considering how many times the ship gets rocked, you think be like, oh well, at least I'm not gonna get like roll out of bed and like, you know, break a limb or crack my skull.
Right.
Even the lower decks bunks, like you can pull something down. At least if the ship rolls, you're not going to roll onto the floor.
Right. Well, if you look at what they did in Strange New Worlds, you get to see Uhura's compartment, and that does have a little door that closes it off.
A little thing you pull down. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I mean, listen, all these things, it's very much like playing into the naval tradition that Star Trek seems to enjoy.
Yes.
So, again, it's not a criticism, more of an observation.
Right.
So
yeah, I was wondering about that electronic bosun's whistle. I'm like,
yeah,
is it electric or not? Why are you blowing into it?
Yeah,
I just didn't get it. You know?
Because it's electronic, because it's the future, and you're still blowing it because of tradition.
Yeah, that is a very good point, Mike. All right, so they get back on the ship and they start to piece all this together. Now it's interesting because Valeris is helping them and seems quite gleefully helping them solve the mystery. I mean, she's very happy when she finds the boot and she sticks it on the wall. You know, the magnetic boot. She's got a big grin, you know, shit-eating grin on her face when she finds it.
She have a grin, or she just sort of, it's more like that kind of smirk. Like if there's that Vulcan smirk, which is barely like you, it's like, it's not really there, but you're like, are you smirking? No, that would be illogical.
I mean, she is a tad, she tends to be a slightly bit more human than other Vulcans I've seen.
Yeah, she's like, they didn't play it for the comic effect, although, but I mean, I guess she's also misleading them, you know, because she's not, you know, they find the boot and she's like, okay.
Right.
You know, she's playing into it because she has to maintain her cover.
Right. Right.
And when they finally confront her and they, you know, figure out that it was her, and there's that moment where just before this, when they're in the sick bay, because they call him like the ship's stenographer.
Yes.
Which is another thing. That's got to be sort of a slow job.
Yeah.
For the most part.
Yeah.
And she's holding the phaser on Spock, and you know the jig is up, and Spock just slaps that phaser out of her hand.
Right.
And it's like that's like for a Vulcan, that's like you know like the equivalent of screaming in somebody's face.
Yeah.
You know,
they didn't really speak to it, but unless you're like a Star Trek person, you don't really realize that like a forced mind meld is almost like rape.
Right? It is.
Well, I was going to say that. So that was something I was going to talk about. Because we talked about this, you know, Angela a couple of weeks ago made a joke about it, about how, you know, Spock, you know, forcing his cadre into McCoy was kind of like rape, but this really was kind of cringy in some.
It is, especially because they do it on the bridge. It's not like they're in a brig.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no good place to do it, but it seems like a weirdly public.
Yeah, and especially seeing the power balance, it's like you know, she really looks up to Spock and all this stuff, and it just makes it creepier, right? That it's like that.
Well, and at one point he grabs her by the back of the head.
Yeah,
she can't back away. I mean,
it's like this whole no means yes kind of.
Yeah, right.
It has not aged well, that moment.
Well, no, but I think it has the impact that it should have, right? I don't think they meant to take it lightly or say that it was okay.
No, but it's still like you watch it now, you're like, ooh, Spock, come on.
Yeah. Well, it's just very intense.
But they could have done something with it, like having said, like, I'm sorry to have had to have done that to you, you know, whatever.
It was regrettable.
Yes.
You know.
Yeah.
But you know, they find out that this is when they find out it's the Federation and the Klingons, the Hawks on both sides, who can't let go of their hatred.
Yeah.
And then they speak to Sulu, and they find out where, because she doesn't know where the new conference, which was supposed to be on Earth.
I just want to go back to that mind mode one more time.
Sure.
You know what's really even creepier is that it only required Kirk to nod at Spock, and he knew what he was supposed to do. It was like No, it was like Mirror. Like this was Mirror Spock all of a sudden. Kirk just
Yeah.
nods at him and he like rapes her. It was
Yeah,
just really bizarre.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, you make a good point, Mike. You really do.
Yeah, it's a very uncomfortable moment in an otherwise pretty, like I said, most of this film has aged very well.
Yeah.
This hasn't. And just
Yeah.
even a throwaway line like when Marina is like helping them escape and she disguises herself as that big sort of ape alien kind of creature.
Right.
And they say, oh, they don't allow girls. I'm like the Klingons that like delicate. They were like, well, we're going to put women in our mining camp, but they don't get to mine.
Yeah.
Really, you know.
Speaking of not allowing girls, that reminds me of another thing. So the Klingon that lost an arm.
Yeah.
I thought like once you were like an invalid and you were a Klingon, you basically had to kill yourself and that was it. That if you'd lost an arm, you couldn't go into battle and you'd have to be like in shame.
Well, it's different. Like, well, the thing is, like, I think you're referring to the episode of TNG where Worf broke his back and he thought he would be an invalid.
Right.
But losing an arm, like one, I think you might be able to get a replacement arm, or two, you could still fire a disruptor or swing a batleth with one arm.
Yeah.
I'm not dead yet. Okay, I'll buy that.
Yeah. I'm not dead yet.
Exactly.
Yeah. The Black Knight.
Is that all you got?
Oh man.
Just a flesh wound.
Yes, that's a flesh wound. That's right. Yeah.
But there may be other cringy moments in that I haven't noticed, but
that was pretty
move
much
on.
it. That was that one really leapt at it.
Yeah, that does feel like, oh, he just raped her on the bridge. Mentally, but still not great.
Yeah.
So they get the information to where the conference is, and they're heading there, and the Excelsior is like can't get there in time, so of course the Enterprise goes first. What did Angela just write? What was that?
She said it's just a flesh wound.
Just a flesh wound.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And of course, Chang is there in his bird of prey, which can fire when cloaked, which is and we find it's just a prototype from Polaris, and it is doing a lot of ass kicking. The Enterprise gets beat up pretty, not completely, but there's a lot of stuff exploding and people falling out of their bunks and all sorts of stuff like that. But once the Excelsior shows up, they sort of keeping on its toes, and they're using their equipment to map gaseous anomalies to find the exhaust of the bird of prey.
Star Trek loves its gaseous anomalies.
Boy.
Oh yeah. Gaseous. Oh my God.
What did you say a couple weeks ago? Gaseous regularities.
Yeah,
because there's so many of them.
Yeah, because how are they anomalies if there's that many of them?
Yeah,
it's more like
Angela says, "Time to cancel Spock."
Yeah. Hashtag cancel Spock.
Yeah. So they are able to use that because, as they say, every ship has to have a tailpipe.
That was Uhura's observation.
Yeah,
and which made me think they were going to like put a big space banana in it.
Right. Yeah.
But McCoy and Spock modify a torpedo. They could lock onto their exhaust, and there was, I guess to give McCoy an extra thing to do. This it's funny because the Doctor, unless somebody gets hurt, the Doctor doesn't have a lot to do. Except
not really. Yeah.
So he was like, "Would you like to assist me on some surgery, Doctor?" And he was like, I forgot what his response was. Almost a Spock-like response. It was like a one-word response.
Yeah.
And they go and do that, and they shoot off, and they, and Chang dies quoting Shakespeare, as he was doing all throughout the battle.
Yeah.
Now our revels are ended, Captain. And he's like, and I will say this for him, like he died as he lived. He believed that, like peace would soften his people, because they're worried about losing their cultural identity. Although you might argue it's the Klingon Empire, so they've conquered worlds and probably other species. So maybe they're high horse about like being like assimilated into Federation culture is a little disingenuous. So, you know,
Yeah, and I won't go to, because it's the setup for the whole movie, the idea that since it is an empire and they have conquered other worlds, is there not another source of
Yeah,
whatever?
that's like so they have no ozone. They can't go anywhere else. Exactly.
Yeah, but
well, that's always sort of been the big thing, because you know, in the J.J. Abrams, you know, the Romulan, the Romulus and Remus orbit goes nova and destroys their
Right.
home world, and theoretically, you know, the Empire spread out enough, but you know, I don't know. It does feel like if Washington D.C. was suddenly like vaporized, you know, there would be a lot of, not like the United States would collapse, but there would be a lot of chaos.
right.
Right. You know,
It just seems to me, when I really think about it, that with all of the planets within that empire, that there should be another planet they could get.
I guess, but it's also like people don't like to leave their homes.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Although it's interesting because they said that Kronos will be uninhabitable in 50 years, and we see Kronos in Next Generation, and everything seems fine. So
Yeah.
maybe they figured out something in between now and then.
Yeah. Well, maybe the Federation helped.
Presumably.
Yeah.
So they beam down and they stop the assassination of the Federation president, played by Kerwood Smith, perhaps best known as Red from that 70s show.
Yeah. Is that who it is?
Yes.
I had no idea.
It is.
Oh my God, because he had that crazy makeup. So
yeah, he's in it. I wrote down his species.
I don't have a picture of him, unfortunately.
Ephrosion. I know nothing about that species.
Yeah.
It's funny because they in these sort of big sort of council room scenes, they tend to fill up the audience with crazy aliens. Some of them are like, oh, that's an Andorian, or that's a Cation, or something. And some of them are like, we've never seen him before, never again. You know,
right? Exactly.
But they stop in the director's cut, which is not the one I watched. I watched it in the past. There were a few extra scenes. There was a character played by Rene Auberjonois, who was a colonel who talks with the Federation president, and I think with Admiral Cartwright. And in the director's cut, Custody stops the Klingon sharpshooter, who's up in the little room up above the council chamber.
Right.
And when he gets knocked down, they pull off his mask, you know, Mission Impossible style.
Yeah.
And it's Rene Auberjonois.
Yeah. Speaking of him, we didn't talk about Christian Slater.
Yeah, Christian Slater.
Oh, yes.
Is the lieutenant on the Excelsior, because his mom is a casting agent and was the casting agent for this movie. There are a lot of actors who love Star Trek or who are happy to have like a little cameo, as he was.
A little bit, yeah.
He got $750 for that.
Yeah, but he was delighted.
Oh yeah.
So they saved the day, and Cartwright is found out because they bring up Valeris, and he's like, oh shit. And it's because Cartwright, that actor, was in Star Trek 4. He was the admiral, that Sarek was talking to.
Right. Yeah.
And he seemed like a benign admiral, but he turned out to be a badmiral, as many of them tend to do. And then everybody applauds, the crew of the Enterprise.
Yeah.
And I love that, the slow clap. I always crack up when I see the beginning of the slow clap, and then everyone else starts clapping.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Like everyone in the audience knows what the hell's going on. Like, what the hell just happened? Okay, we're
it doesn't feel like they really fully explained what was going on.
Yeah.
But John Schuck, who we saw in Star Trek 4, Klingon ambassador, we've seen him in this picture. When he's applauding, he's like,
yeah.
He looks like Charles Foster Kane applauding for his girlfriend terribly singing opera in that opera house he built for her. Just very like,
yeah,
I'm gonna clap. I have to clap.
Yeah,
this is not what I wanted.
Yeah.
So
it was like the end of an '80s movie. It was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was. So it worked out rather nicely.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many. There were like a lot of neat little things. One of the things I noticed, and this is the first time I noticed it, is Valeris's insignia. Like lieutenants were like two little sort of triangles, not exactly triangles, but it was like, but she had what at first I was like, oh, she wearing a commander's thing, but instead of like Sue, like Chekhov and Uhura all had that, and it was like sort of a little, little two little horns on the top and the bottom, and then there was an open space and like two bars, and that was full commander. And she had the two little horns on top and bottom, and one bar.
Okay.
Which seemed like a weird variation. Like again, it's like,
yeah,
I don't know, because Christian Slater had the regular lieutenant's insignia, and again, picking nits, and it's she obviously had a bigger part, and I guess they wanted to give her a little more bling on her outfit.
Yeah.
But it does feel like sometimes somebody should be, paying a little attention.
Yeah.
And again, it doesn't ruin the movie for me. It was the first time I've noticed it after seeing this movie many, many times. So it in no way diminishes my enjoyment, but it was just sort of an interesting little observation.
Right.
And of course, we find out that Spock is descended from Sherlock Holmes, presumably on his mother's side. When he says, when the impossible has been
an ancestor of mine.
Yeah.
It says, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. As an ancestor of his son. So there's also some fan canon that because his mom's name was Grayson, he's also descended from Dick Grayson, aka Robin from Batman and Robin, later Nightwing. Make of that what you will.
Yes.
That's headcanon if I ever heard it.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
But overall, this film holds up.
And then we have the final send-off scene.
Yeah, this is the last time they're all together, and Sulu goes off to do whatever he's going to do.
Right.
Really chart more gaseous anomalies.
Yes.
Because that seems to be the Federation's. They're worried about losing Starfleet when most of Starfleet is charting gaseous anomalies.
Yeah, I know.
So I don't think the Klingons have anything to worry about.
No, I don't know.
I'd love to bring up a Federation chart. Gas.
Yeah.
We've charted a lot of gaseous anomalies.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and that's what the Enterprise D did for the first two seasons.
Oh my God, they do that. That's always in the opening. We're like, we finished charting gaseous anomalies in the Mutaris section.
Yeah, it's like the New Yorker thing. It's just all gas, and then the horizon is just not gas.
It's like Earth, Vulcan, Andor, gas. Hang on, Empire.
And it's funny because I never really noticed that about the first couple seasons of Next Gen until I did my COVID binge.
Oh yeah,
and I watched them all in a row because you when you were watching them week to week, you probably didn't think about it.
Yeah,
you watch them all in a row. It's like every opening Captain's Log for like almost the first two seasons. That's what Picard's talking about. It's very strange.
Yeah, and if you count Picard, there's even like more than one episode of finding your long lost son in a gaseous anomaly.
There's a lot of unlikely reunions going on in Star Trek.
Yeah.
But
I write it straight on to morning.
Yeah, I think you guys are right. I think it was a nice send off for them. The film had some action. It had some humor. I thought that it was directed well. I thought Shatner was directed well. I thought he had some good moments in it. So overall, it is definitely a nice send off for the cast.
It is. This movie only cost $25 million to make.
Wow.
Now, of course, that was $25 million back in the day.
Yeah.
But they, like in the commentary, they talked about how ways they sort of trimmed fat, from the script, and like that conference room, they hung a bunch of black curtains and stuff, and that gave the illusion of sort of depth and in space. So they
did with all that. They had some awesome physical effects. The torpedo going through the saucer section, which was actual pyrotechnics and model building and everything. That was awesome.
Right.
Yeah, they were still using that was sort of towards the end of practical effects as the standard.
Right.
We were getting more into digital effects as it went on.
Did ILM come back for this film?
Oh yeah, and that was interesting too, because one of the guys that worked on this film that did the ILM stuff was the co-creator of Photoshop.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
interesting. You've had a lot of fantastic fun facts, Mike. I got to tell you.
Here's another fun fact. This is the when Kirk is finally signing off and they're sailing off into the sunset. Where no man, and he goes, where no one has gone before, which is the first time that was used in the movies.
Yes. Yes.
But they couldn't get themselves to say woman. They said man, but they couldn't say woman, so they had to go for one, man or one.
Well, it's gender neutral, and it could be anybody.
Right.
Yeah. But
non-binary. Can you have a non-binary binar?
I'm not going to touch that one, Mike.
I like that. That's funny. All right, guys. I think we are 5 minutes.
One last little note.
Sure.
Risley Whitney, who played Yeoman Rand back in the day, is on the bridge of the Excelsior. Is there? She's credited as the Excelsior communications officer, not as Janice Rand. Although, in my we've seen her in other roles. Like they throw her a bone. This is almost like the most action she got.
There
she had more lines than this.
She's in the corner there.
Yeah, there she is.
Yeah. Behind the shields.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Now, do you really think that turning the ship into the wave would have protected it? Like as though you were at sea and you were going through a enormous.
Well, I mean, it was a helmsman.
It couldn't hoist.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah. Well, you think they might have just gone straight up again, like in movies.
Two-dimensional. I know this two-dimensional wave comes at them, and they still don't get out of the way, Leo.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, much like in cartoons, and also in that Alien film where the ship is rolling towards them.
Yeah.
Just go to the left or the right.
Yeah.
Why? Like, you're not going to outrun it. Just get out of the way.
Yeah, I thought in Wrath of Khan they finally figured out they could go up and down, but I guess
yeah. Well, it was a cool visual to see
it was
Excelsior turn into the wave. So
that later that effect was used in the new versions of Star Wars for the explosion of the Death Star. That was added. That wave effect. So.
Yeah, neat.
And it's been used quite a bit since then. So
neat. Well, it was good to see ILM come back. So that's cool. Yeah. All right, guys. Hey, Mike, thank you so much for coming. You were fantastic.
Thank you for having me.
Great guest. We're gonna have you back again, definitely.
I hope so. I'm looking forward to the new series, so it'll be awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Strange New Worlds, you mean?
Sorry, I meant the new season.
Sorry. Yes, in 2 weeks.
Yeah. No, I know. We're all looking forward to that. And I guess I'm going to roll us out of here. Folks, don't forget, we'll be posting tomorrow the podcast version of this program if you'd like to take it with you. And also, what else? Next week we come back and we do
Generations to wrap up our
film series,
our movie series.
Yeah.
And it is appropriate since it's sort of the transition between the original series and Next Generation.
Right. So
I've not watched it in a while. I'm curious to see how I enjoy it.
I haven't seen it in a while either.
I wouldn't say it's my favorite, but it's certainly not my least favorite.
I just hate that they kill off Kirk.
His first death is so much cooler than his
second death.
Yeah.
And then there he is living his best life in the Nexus. And we'll talk about this next time.
The giant space gash thing. Yeah.
Yeah. But at any rate, guys, as I say to my peeping Tom, thank you for watching. And we will be back next week. Wait a minute. What the heck? Now I'm trying to find the end credits. It's got to be this one. There it is.
All right.
So long, everybody. Live long and prosper. Have a great week.
Nice, Jim.